Hey everyone, it's Silver here. I finally decided to stop procrastinating and make a video guide that goes along with my guide on MMO mines. For those of you who don't like reading as much, or if a video is easier to follow. Because Neverwinter is always receiving updates, keep in mind that this video will eventually become outdated. It's current enough through Module 13, the Lost City of Omu. I am not going to cover gear or boons in this video because there's just so many options that it would take me a really long time to cover them all. For those two sections, please refer to my written guide on MMO mines. All relevant links that I mentioned in the video will be in the description, as well as timestamps for each specific section. Alright, so let's get started. If you're new, you might be wondering, well, why should I choose a cleric? I could be a great weapon fighter and just smash everything so easily. Well, the thing is, the glyphs are only so good because of how many buffs they receive. They receive a huge amount of buffs from their parties, their clerics, their paladins, guardian fighters, and this is where the clerics come in. There's two types of clerics. You have your AC, or Anointed Champion Cleric, which is a very strong offensive and defensive buffer. Then you have your DO, or Divine Oracle Cleric, which provides more debuffs but also flat damage buffs from things such as Terrifying Insight and Hallowed Grounds, which I will go into more detail in my Divine Oracle video, which doesn't exist yet, but it will. If you're brand new to clerics, you can check out my class mechanics video, which also doesn't exist yet, but it also will exist soon. Now, you might be thinking, wait, but I thought clerics were healers. Well, they are. They are. But the truth is, the further you progress through the game, the less heals you'll need to provide. You'll instead be buffing your party's offenses and defenses enough that either things die too quickly to even hurt you, or you'll buff your group's damage resistance enough that the amount of heals needed isn't really noteworthy. Of course, that isn't taking into account the fact that you will likely be buffed to some extent as well, making your heals even more powerful. So first things first, you're making a cleric, and obviously the first thing you need to choose is your race. Honestly, race doesn't make a huge difference in your performance. The quote-unquote best races are just marginally better and are only important if you're interested in min-maxing your characters to squeeze out as much power as you can. Races are primarily cosmetic, so choose whatever looks the coolest to you. Because you're going to be staring at it for a while. However, you're expecting me to give you an answer here for the best race, so I'll do my best. In my opinion, the three best races are, of course, Dragonborn, and then Sun Elf, and Human. Dragonborn lets you choose which two ability scores receive a bonus, and it also gives you 3% more power and crit. These are both really good bonuses, but Dragonborn is a quote-unquote premium race that not everyone has access to, and it might not be an option for you. In that case, I 100% recommend Sun Elf. That was my choice, and I actually chose it over Dragonborn, even though I do have that race unlocked. Sun Elf gives you +2 points to intelligence and either charisma or dexterity. You don't get a bonus to your primary ability score, but you do get 2% more action points, which is super important for a cleric. The extra intelligence goes towards giving your powers faster cooldowns, and you also get 10% control resistance. Humans get 3% more defense, and a +2 bonus to any one ability score. Their strongest point is the 3 extra heroic feat points that they get. These are the feat points that you spend from levels 5 to 30. These can help you max out more of your feats. It's really up to you what race you choose. You could be a dwarf if you really wanted. I mean, like I said, they're mostly cosmetic, so just choose whatever works best for you. Alright, now next up is ability scores. As a cleric, your primary ability score that you're going to want to get as high as possible is Wisdom. This determines your bonus damage, bonus healing, and control resistance. Since you get 2 points every level, you're going to want to put the rest of your points into Charisma, which gives you more action points and a faster recharge speed. As you might have seen on my guide, I show a picture of me with 28 Wisdom. Now, if I were a Dragonborn or another class with a Wisdom bonus, I could have had 30. However, now you can see that I only have 24 points in Wisdom, and this is because of some gear changes I made with Module 13. However, Wisdom is still very important and you should always want to get it as high as you can. Okay, now it's time to get into the meat of the cleric, or what I call the feats. These are half of what makes a cleric as good as they are. The other half being powers, which I'll cover after this. As you might have seen in my guide, I have two versions of my AC feats. One of them is better for leveling healers, or until you're geared enough to start doing the harder dungeons like FBI and MSP and Tong and stuff. The other is a complete full buffer, like buffs all day, every day. That is the one that I'm going to cover here, and if you're interested in the other set of feats, it's the first one on the AC feats page and is labeled Gift of Faith. Oh, sorry, these monsters are like saying hello to me. I don't like playing soloing things on my AC, but I have to. Guess you guys would be bored if I just didn't do anything, right? I'm going to show my feats here for the buff build, but I'm not going to explain every one of them because there's like 20. I don't actually know how many there are. But I'm just going to touch on the important ones for the purposes of this video. You can see the descriptions of all the ones I chose on my guide itself. So first off, here we have Greater Fortune, which makes your Wisdom give you 3% more healing per point, which is awesome. It makes your healing more effective. Now, I know you're all like, well, wait, you just said healing isn't really necessary anymore. That's true, and honestly, you could get away without using this at the later levels, but when you're first starting off, and when you're first starting into the whole buffing thing instead of healing, you probably won't have as many passive heals from your boons, campaign boons, so having something like this can really help you adjust to that whole, moving from healing to buffing period. And now next we have Repurposed Soul, which honestly, when I first started, I didn't really realize the importance and how good this feat was. It doesn't really seem that much at first. Whenever one of your spells has a critical effect, the target of that spell disperses a small area effect heal, which heals you and your allies for up to 15% of the spell's effect. Oh boo, 15%. My hits only hit for like 10k anyway. Well, yes, okay. But when you're in a party in a dungeon and you're getting buffed as well as everyone else, you can do pretty good damage even if you don't have a high crit chance, or if you don't have high crit severity and stuff. So this one's actually very useful. It basically just means whenever you crit, you're healing yourself and your allies, and with everything being as buffed as they are, especially in the more endgame groups, you're never going to have to focus on heals ever again. And now Cleanse. The Guardian Fighters hate it! I'm just kidding. Although some of them do. But Cleanse itself is a super important feat. Especially in the harder content, and I'll explain why here. This one gives you a 30% chance to remove a dot, or damage over time, effect from an ally when you heal them. And then, like I said, once you get into the harder dungeon, dots can be deadly. Think Tong here. So clearing them is super important. Next up on the list, Battle Fervor. This improves Blessing of Battle's buff so that it increases your party's power by 15% of your power. This is where we start getting into the whole power share thing. There's quite a few feats on here that will help you power share and powers as well. So it's good to sort of stack up all these things so that all the DPS in your party, and even the other supports too, can gain as much benefit from you as possible. And next up we have Gift of Haste. I actually didn't start using this one until recently. I hadn't really paid much attention to the Virtuous tree before, but this one's actually really nice. Your heal over time powers also grant the target up to 5% of their action points over 5 seconds. So this is about 1% of their action points every second. This is really awesome for filling everyone's action points before entering a boss fight. You know, you just sort of stand there and spam Divine Glow on everyone until they're happy. Or until they get annoyed and yell at you. That happens sometimes too because they just don't understand. Alright, next we have Prestigious Exaltation. This one increases the duration of the Exaltation buff, which I'll get into in the power section, but Exaltation is one of the strongest powers, one of the strongest buffing powers, that an AC has. And it also increases your heals by 10%. This part's less important. If you had super high recovery and stuff, you could get away without using this and putting these points into something else. However, I wouldn't risk it because having Exaltation up all the time is really great. Now we have Ancient Warding. As you can see, all three of these are the AC Paragon feats. That just shows how important they are. Ancient Warding here. When Anointed Army ends, that's your daily power, the affected targets are healed and gain 5% of their action points. This is another one of those action points things. You're going to want to keep everyone's action points up as well as your own, of course, while also buffing their power. That's pretty much what an AC is, a huge buffing machine. So, like I said, you want to sort of stack all these things together. And once you stack everything on top of each other and are able to time it and keep it all up 100% of the time, the buffs that you can get from an AC are pretty amazing. Alrighty, now let's move on to powers. So far up to this point, everything has been about, oh, well, this will buff this power, and this other thing will buff that. So now it's time to actually explain what it is that you're increasing the effectiveness of. If you're just starting out and can't do the harder dungeons yet, you might want to slot in some more healing and protective spells depending on the party you're running with. That's the thing with powers. As a cleric, you have to adapt to the situation presented to you and learn how to adjust to certain things to make your group as effective as possible. So there's quite a few options here, mostly when it comes to the encounters. For your at-wills, you're always going to want to have Blessing of Battle, which you can see here. Blah blah blah, deal radiant damage to enemy. Decrease damage taken by nearby allies within 20 feet by 2%. Oh boo, that seems lame. Oh, but wait. We combined it with our Feat Battle Fervor from earlier, which gave everybody 15% of my power. Oh, okay, so that makes a lot of sense. If you can keep this up 100% of the time, your allies will all have 15% of your power. And depending how high your base power is, it can be a pretty nice amount. I notice I like enunciating pretty so far in this video. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. Moving on. Okay. For your other at-will, it really doesn't matter a whole lot which one you choose, but I prefer to use Astral Seal because it heals your allies when they hit the thing that you mark. It's kind of like fake lifesteal. So like you don't need to have the lifesteal stat, but it heals you when you hit things, so you know, it's sort of similar. Okay, for my encounters, I stick with, as you cannot see here because I just switched them out to do part of that heroic encounter. When I first started playing my AC, for my encounters I used Astral Shield, Bastion of Health, and Divine Glow, which are mostly, or actually they're all healing, protection spells, blah 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 blah. Okay, that's all fine and dandy when you're starting to level and when you're starting to build your cleric and starting to do the tier 2 dungeons like CN and Ethos and stuff. But once you get past that point, it starts being less effective and you need to sort of regroup and come up with a new plan. These three powers here are useful in, let's say, from a fresh 70 up until about 9 to 10k item level or so. And this is only in dungeons, this is not soloing. Okay, just want to make that clear. At that point, the groups you're in will probably need more defenses and healing than the higher level groups. Oh, that's a nice... There's a person here? I didn't know there was a person model in that power. Maybe it's because I really lowered my graphics settings for this. I'm pretty sure there was not a person there before. Okay, anyway, moving on. After you're past that point where the defenses aren't as necessary anymore, the first thing you're going to want to do is switch out either Astral Shield or Bastion. It just depends on, this is where you start off trying to decide what the group needs more, heals or defenses. And you're going to want to either use Forge Master's Flame here, or Break the Spirit. Both of these, when empowered, give your party a damage boost, Break the Spirit having a higher damage boost than Forge Master's. So, when there's two clerics in a group, each one takes one of these powers and they both keep them empowered, and this causes both of the damage bonuses to stack. And then if you're alone, take Break the Spirit because, as I said, the damage buff is larger per stack. Okay, I just realized I forgot to talk about Exaltation. That's the most important buff here. Okay. Once you're past the mid-tier of dungeons and you start running with high-end groups, or at least groups where there's only one DPS and there are 4 buffers, you're going to want to start using Exaltation. Now, of course, you can use this before then too, if you want to get into practice or if you just want to test it out or something. But it's most effective when everyone in the party is buffing a specific person, and then that all stacks together and you see a huge damage increase. Now, Exaltation here, as you can see, heal them, blah blah, increase the target's damage by 6%, and then reduce their damage taken by 6%. And now you can empower this if you want. I try to empower this most of the time. I do like a stagger empower between Break the Spirit or Forge Masters and Exaltation. So now, empowering this, you get an additional damage dealt by 5% per stack. So empowering this is actually really nice. And the only problem that a lot of people realize with this is that it's a single target power. So if you're in a group of people and you're trying to target them, it can be pretty difficult to get the power to target the person you want. However, there is a solution for this. If you're on PC, you can use a keybind to target a specific person every time, so you never have to worry about missing or anything. Sorry console people, but PC Master Race, and by using that keybind, which I have bound to my control key, I can choose a specific person's name, and then just press Control instead of E in this case for my power, and it'll just buff them without me even having to focus on it, which is awesome. Now, dailies are the other major buff point of clerics. As an AC, you're going to want Anointed Army, and you're going to want to keep it up as close to 100% of the time as you can. Like, you're going to want to be spawning Anointed Armies out of your butthole like you just spent 6 hours eating Taco Bell. This is where using the DC Sigil artifact would be useful. Anointed Army increases your party's power by 33% of your power, a huge amount. It's best to cast this right as everyone is running into combat, so they will have bonus power before their bondings proc, and then keep it up for the rest of the fight. Now, on to class features. Hastening Light reduces everyone's cooldowns by 4 seconds when you use dailies. Think of the Taco Bell analogy here. And then Holy Fervor for the bonus action points. I hope it's all coming together now, all the action points, all the recovery, all the power. It all just turns you into a huge buffing machine. And this is why you see clerics always wanted in dungeon groups, especially the endgame dungeons, MSP, FBI, Tong, even Cradle nowadays. They want at least 2, more than 2 for the trial, of course. But 2 clerics are usually the go-to group for dungeons like that because they just go so well together, AC and DO, that it's pretty hard to make up for the loss with another class. At this point in the video, you should have a general idea of what stats you need the most, and those are power, recovery, and crit in that order. You want to prioritize power, but stack recovery until you have about 18,000. This includes bonding buffs, remember. That should be enough to give you 100% action point gain and recharge speed. As you can see, I have about 14.6k without my bondings up, and without a campfire buff. And this equates to about 92% recharge and 97% action point gain just by sitting here idly, which is still a pretty nice cooldown. Let me see if I can borrow some of the target dummies here and give you a better example of what stats can look like. Let me put on something useful, like, sure, okay. Alright, so now you see Blessing of Battle, Astral Seal, and you can see my power is already up to 98k. 20k recovery, oh, almost 100k power just by standing here by myself, look at that. And now as you can see, my action point and recharge gain are well over 100%, which is perfect. You'll also want to get your critical chance as close to 100% as possible, and as you can see, I'm not really there yet, I'm only about 60%. But that's sort of what I'm going to work on once I start tweaking things more. But this build specifically reaches maximum effectiveness at 100% crit chance, mostly because of things like Repurposed Soul, like I talked about before, healing when you hit crits, And then of course damage. AC clerics can actually do a pretty high amount of damage if they're built like that. Now enchants. On your character, you're going to want all of your offenses to be radiants, and you want to have those ranked up first. Now this is different than a DPS class where, for example, you would want to upgrade your bondings first and your offensive enchantments on your companion first, because bondings increase the stats given to you. Now in this case, for power, bonded power is not shared. So the power I gain from my bondings won't have any effect on the power I give to my party members. So that's why it's important to work on upgrading the enchants on yourself first for a cleric. As I said, I have radiance in all my offensive slots for maximum base power, and I think almost all of mine are rank 13 right now. That's what I've been working on this weekend. As you can see, I finally hit 17k item level, and this means that I am still not good, because you're never good at this game. Never. In my defense slots, I keep Azures, but you can also put Radiance in there too for the bonus hit points if you run with a Paladin often. Paladins have a class feature called Aura of Courage that gives you bonus damage depending on how many hit points you have. This isn't as important as a support class, but it's something to consider. The only problem with it is that Assassin's Covenant, the Mount Insignia bonus, won't be nearly as useful. If you want to maximize the effectiveness of Assassin's Covenant to gain the most base power, you can put Black Ice enchantments in your defense slots. These give you the most points if you add up all the defense, deflect, and lifesteal, and 10% of it converts to power. So as you can see, a rank 13 enchantment will give you 850 points. If I were to put this in my defense slot, well, I mean, it's a radiant, but you get the idea. 850 points. And then if you were to look up the Black Ice enchantment, and then add up all of the defense, deflection, and lifesteal, you get 1200 points, which is a lot more than 850. So that would give you a lot more base power for us from Assassin's Covenant. For your utility slots, it really doesn't matter. Put refinement enchants like Dragon Horde, Quartermasters, or Fey Blessing, or you can just put in Darks for movement. Movement is nice. It makes me run a lot faster than I can in real life, so I mean, I can't really complain there. What's next? Artifacts. Okay, you can see my 4 main artifacts here: Sigil of the Devoted, Fragmented Key of Stars, Symbol of Fire, and Sigil of the Controller. I've gone through a lot of artifacts on my DC compared to any other class I play, mostly because at certain points in my building my character, I needed more of a certain stat. In the beginning, I went for all power recovery. Great. Then I had way too much recovery, and I was still upgrading all my stuff. So I thought, well, I guess I should start adding in some crit, and I did. And I do eventually want to replace my Symbol of Fire with something that has more power and crit, but that's not on my immediate to-do list. Now let's go into each of these in detail. Sigil of the Devoted. This is my primary artifact. I use it all the time, even with my recovery and action point gain as high as they are. Why? Well, it's amazing for filling up action points. It gives you 100% of my action points over 15 seconds, and heals me when I use an encounter, but that's less important. Honestly, this is good for almost any class. It's especially useful if your recovery isn't high enough, or if you're in a situation where you need to cast dailies faster than you can refill your action points. Now you have Fragmented Key of Stars. This is probably one of the most expensive artifacts in the game. I only switched to this after I got my recovery where I needed it. Consider this an endgame option. You probably won't want to aim for this right away. It gives power, crit, and armor penetration, the 3 big offensive stats, so this artifact is best for DPS classes. However, it still has a use here on a DC. Next up, Symbol of Fire. This should be in every cleric's arsenal, especially at the beginning. It's a must-have. Power, recovery, and defense. Perfect. And this is one that you might use for the entire lifespan of your cleric, so it's well worth picking up if you're just starting out. However, if it's your first character, it might not be attainable for you yet, but just keep it in the back of your mind for when you start earning Astral Diamonds. And lastly, Sigil of the Controller. This is the Control Wizard sigil that you get from the Vault of the Nine quest, similar to Sigil of the Devoted for the cleric. This one gives power, crit, and control resist. I'm sure you can see a common theme with my artifacts, and that's that all of them have power as their primary stat. This is going back to the point that base power is super important for an AC. Now, of course, I could get my base power a lot higher than it is now. Like, for example, my helmet doesn't even have power on it. I could easily use a Rex Corona or Guys with the Wolf Clan or something and have it over 50k so easily. But that would come along with sacrificing some of these other stats that I've used to make my cleric as good as it is. So, as awesome as power share is, I personally don't think you need to drop everything and have everything power all the time, but some people think that, and maybe it's cool, maybe it'll work for you, that's cool. I mean, that's just not how I choose to do it. Now, there's plenty of other artifact options, like if you open your collections page and go to artifacts, there's 37 different ones. There's only 37. Well, so I guess some of them have multiple on a page, but you get the idea. There's a lot of artifacts to choose from. I just went over the ones that I use here, but there are some other great options, like Tiamat's Orb of Majesty, which goes with the Tiamat set, which is pretty much the intro gear set that you can see on my guide. Then there's Symbol of Air, which is similar to Symbol of Fire. Sigil of the Hunter, which is a good power recovery, and it comes from the Hunter Ranger Vault of the Nine quest. Or you could look into getting one of the banner artifacts to use as your primary instead of the Sigil of the Devoted. Like the Vanguard or the Champion's Banner, those buff your party's defense and I think damage if you stand in them, which in my opinion isn't as good as just flat buffing your action points, but I've seen some clerics use them and some other classes too, and they can be helpful. Now on to companions. Neverwinter has a pretty low selection of support companions, and for the most part it's just using whatever ones you find that have the best active bonuses. As my summoned companion, you can see I use a Liland, and some other viable options are the Sellsword or the Con Artist, or even the Chultan Tiger, all three of which have a 10% debuff attack after the blue rank. I do plan on eventually changing to the Con Artist just for the debuff. However, I do really like my Liland. It's cheap, it's easy to gear, 3 rings, and you can do all the content with it. Like, I run Cradle of the Death God and Tong all the time with it. It's not as necessary on a cleric to have an amazing companion compared to a DPS class. I also use a Rust monster, which debuffs the attacker whenever I get hit, and then there's also a Velociraptor, which stacks with other party members who also use it to give them a higher damage buff, 1% per person using one in the party. I grabbed this when they first came out, hoping it would be useful. It's only really good at as long as everyone in your party is using one. I still think it's okay to use. I picked up an Energon for the bonus hit points. Like, I really like having hit points. Sometimes I switch to the hit point guild boon just so that I can feel like a tank. And when I'm in a party with all 5 VIP bonuses, I have 214k hit points. Considering I have a whole 0 defense on my companion now, I kind of like to stick with the defense boon most of the time. The Laughing Skull I grabbed just because it gives me bonus power and recovery at the beginning of combat. Now, like I said, there's not a whole lot of support companions out there, so if you can max more power here because there's quite a few companions that give you power as their active bonus, just a flat power stat, and I believe those ones do count towards your power sharing. So you could use, for example, I think Sellsword has a plus 300 power buff. I think a Ghost gives you power. I don't think it says much though. And then the Allosaur gives you some power too, you know. Just, you could stack all kinds of stuff here, basically. It's not like a DPS class where there's like select 5 or 6 companions for you to choose from that are good. Now, of course, you could stack DPS companions here too if you wanted and become like a crazy fighting machine if you wanted to, but that's just not what I wanted to do with my cleric. Some other options also are the Polar Bear Cup, which I used when I was first starting out too, that gives you 5% bonus outgoing healing, and this is one of those companions that's great when you're starting out, like I said. but then loses effectiveness over time as you start to need less healing. One thing a lot of people ask about is the Harper Bard companion, and if it's worth it. Well, first off, it's extremely expensive, so it's already unreachable for the majority of people. Let's see, how much is it? 1.2 mil, roughly. Like, that's a lot of money for a blue companion that you'll have to upgrade to purple eventually. You know, I don't know. It has 2 defense slots too, which kinda sucks for bondings. Yeah, bonded power isn't shared, so it doesn't matter a whole lot, but for someone like me who stacks crit on their companion as well, it kinda, I guess it doesn't really affect crit actually, but that would have me with a couple thousand defense on my companion that I don't really need, when I could instead be using it to stack power on myself and give myself more damage. I don't know. It just seems like a waste of money, in my opinion. I mean, it has some great powers. It gives a bonus to your hit points and to your party's power and crit or defense and deflect. The bonus depends on how much health they have. It also decreases the enemy's damage resistance and all that. While all that seems great, it's only effective if you use it as your summoned companion, because the active bonus is just the hit points, and using it like that is kinda useless. It's not as easy to gear as a Leyland or a Con Artist, and I mean, honestly, overall, the defense slots are what really makes me think it isn't as worth it. If those were all 3 offense slots, I probably would consider it, except getting the gear for it would be kind of annoying. Anyways, on to mounts. Mounts. The best legendary combat power is the T-Rex, hands down. It lowers the target's defenses by 10% for 10 seconds, and if the target is a minion, it will just violently eat them. I mean, who doesn't want to see that? This gets extremely useful in the harder dungeons, especially Tomb of the Nine Gods with those pesky little souls that you only have like 10 seconds to murder. And as for the equip power, as an AC, you'll ideally want something with 4,000 power. But I don't even use that. I use the T-Rex's 2,000 power and 2,000 armor penetration. If you don't have a legendary mount, which most people don't, go for one with 2,000 power, definitely. This counts as the base power and will be shared with your party, so super important here. Now for insignia bonuses. Insignia bonuses here. The main 5 to go for are Gladiator's Guile? I don't know how to pronounce that. Protector's Camaraderie, Assassin's Covenant, Shepherd's Devotion, and Wanderer's Fortune. If you have a legendary mount, you can swap out Wanderer's Fortune for Cavalry's Warning, which will increase pretty much all of your base stats by 10%. Gladiators increases your movement speed and stamina gain. And this isn't really an offensive bonus, it's extremely nice to have because walking slow sucks. Protector's Camaraderie. When your companion attacks, you gain 3% of your power and defense for 10 seconds, and this can stack up to 4 times. So it's basically a 12% power and defense bonus, assuming your companion doesn't die every 5 seconds and can keep it up all the time. Assassin's Covenant. This is the big one here, the big power thing here. It takes away 10% of your defense, deflection, and lifesteal, and now you're like, what? 10% of my defenses, that sucks. Okay, but listen. It gives you the combination of the lost stats as power. Think about it. It seems a bit strange at first, but you really don't need to worry about defenses as much, especially the further you get along. And you want to focus on increasing your base power as much as possible. And lastly, you have Wanderer's Fortune, which basically gives you a chance to drop refinement whenever you kill stuff. It's great to earn refinement points, but it's not necessary for offensive purposes, which is why I say switch it out with Cavalry's Warning if you have a legendary mount. Alright everyone, so that's pretty much a quick overview of everything you need to know to use my AC Cleric build. I'm glad I finally got this done because I procrastinated it for a really long time, and some people prefer to watch videos than read walls of text. Sorry, and I get that. I get it. Not wanting to read walls of text. If you have any questions, please don't be afraid to comment here or reach out to me in game or on Discord. And don't forget that all relevant and helpful links are in the description in case you need to reference anything. See you all next time, and thanks for watching.